But I'm here to actually introduce our guest. So thank you to our guest, Mathai. I'm going to talk a little bit real quick about the League of Women Voters. If you don't know, it was founded in 1920, so it's got some history, it's got some sustainability. If you're interested in joining, you should check it out. It has a long history of really promoting women as political change agents. And we here at the RHA are a very large board. I think we're 7 deep, and 4 of them are women. So we also champion women as change agents of our political system. They're part of a larger network, a national network, but this is really our local chapter here, and I have the pleasure of introducing Anna Mathai, who is the VP and co-chair of Voter Service, to come up and really give us a presentation on what is going on. I see voter registration guides all over the place. Yeah, that's a lot to digest, and she's gonna give us a really open, give us all the sides, a full take, and knowledge. So get ready for your knowledge, get your note-taking device out if you need it. Let's give a warm welcome to Anna Mathai, and thank her for giving us her time, and more than anything, her knowledge. Thank you.
So, what really is a state proposition? So a state proposition can actually make new laws. They can change existing laws, or they can change the California Constitution. So there are sort of 3 things that propositions can do. There are 2 ways that propositions get on the ballot. One is the top line, through the state legislature. So the California lawmakers, the legislature has to vote by a 2/3 majority, and they can put something on the ballot. So that's all the single-digit ones, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The second way is through initiatives. So voter groups, many times you go out various places for grocery shopping, somebody's trying to get you to sign something. So there are voter groups, there are sort of special interest groups that collect signatures, and they can put what's called an initiative on the ballot, and those are your double-digit ones. That's 32 to 36. And it's especially important for those ones to sort of see who the proponent and opponents are, and we'll get into that. We also have 3 bond measures. Sorry, we have 2 bond measures and one that's kind of bond adjacent. So let's really talk about what a bond is, and then we get started. So what is a bond? So just like, when you buy a house, you take out a mortgage. So you buy your house, you get all the money up front, and then you pay it back over time. So the state does similar things. When they're trying to build, schools, build bridges, sort of big things, what the state does is a government borrows money. So they sell long-term bonds to investors, and then they repay the investors over time with interest. And that money that they're repaying is over to 30 to 40 years. So just like your mortgage comes out of your, a monthly budget, similarly the state money that they're repaying to the investors comes out of the state general fund. So that's what we pay as taxes and fees, that's the state general fund, and the money comes out over time. So we've got 3 bond-related ones. Let's start with the first one. So this is a schools bond, and this is proposition 2. So in each of these slides, each of these sort of propositions, I'll have a little bit about background and effect. If it's a bond, if it's something with a lot of money, there's a second slide about fiscal effect. There's a third slide that we call the money slide, who's behind, and then we end up with supporters, opponents, and what the proposition does. So proposition 2, it's a bond for schools. So a little bit of background. California has about 10,000 public schools and 115 community colleges. And the state and the local districts share the costs of repairing and building, new schools. And both the state and the local school districts both cover the cost of their share of building by issuing bonds. So we actually had a local school bond in 2020 for OUSD. This is a state bond. So over time, both the state and local districts sort of come to the voters and ask for approval to issue more bond debt. So Proposition 2 is asking you to allow California to issue $10 billion in bonds If it passes, the money obtained by selling these bonds will then be distributed to local school districts in terms of matching grants. So OUSD might have a list of projects that they want to work on. They apply to the state, and the state sort of matches what OUSD is planning to spend on a project. Little bit more background again, a lot of the schools in California are pretty old, so there's an estimate that about 40% of students attend schools that don't meet minimum facility standards, and about 15% attend schools with extreme deficiencies. I mean, we've heard about lead in the water at Oakland schools, some similar issues, water damage, power failures, so on and so forth. The last school bond was approved in 2016 for $9 billion. So that money has kind of been spent. There was actually a bond on the ballot in 2020, which is actually the first time a school's bond has actually failed. Might have to do with COVID, not really sure. But again, this bond measure is asking for $10 billion overall with this breakdown. $8.5 billion for K through 12, and then $1.5 billion for community colleges. The fiscal effects, so just again, like a mortgage, when you take out a mortgage, what's the effect on your monthly budget? Similarly here, to pay back this interest to the investors, this would result in increased state expenses of $500 million a year over 35 years. And for loosely speaking, the California General Fund every year is about $200 billion or so. So this is under 0.5% if you're a percentage type person. This is what we call the money slide. So it's about 4.8 million in support of it. $3 sign means that organization has put in more than $1 million. So you can see, for example, the California Teachers Association building. No money against it. It's a little bit hard to see here, but a couple of names here are bolded, and if the names are bolded, they are signatories, so you'll actually see that. So I'll just give you a few seconds to kind of look over sort of supporters and opponents.
What do you mean by signatories?
So when you actually see it, I've seen people with some voter guides, the official voter guides. So people sign on to the ballot measure, they feel very strongly about it. So when you see in your ballot guide, you'll see an argument in support or opponent or opposed. So those are the people. So for example, Assembly Member Bill Isaili and then the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association, they're the ones that have signed the opposing statement. Yeah. So I guess it just kind of means that maybe they were in pretty early or they felt really strongly about it. So we just point that out.
I have a question.
Yeah.
It says for $4.8 million, that's not the same amount that the bond is? The whole bond?
So this slide, and that's actually a great question. So I know lots of money running around. So this slide is what we call the money slide. And this is what the supporters and opponents have put into supporting or opposing. So that's what the 4.8 million. And again, this money doesn't typically change at this point, but this is a little dated. So it's about 2-3 weeks ago, but typically it doesn't change a whole lot. So you get a sense of the players from this. All right. So again, in terms of what the supporters and opponents say, supporters point out that it's really crucial to fund basic school repairs, to meet safety standards, support students, to study better if they have, or learn better if they have better facilities. They're pointing out that the funds are approved only with sort of local districts matching with community input, so the money will be used well. And this measure also has special support for small districts that have a harder time raising local bonds and those with disadvantaged communities. So that's the supporters. The opponents, again, say, they're all for school facilities being built. They really argue that it should be funded from the general fund, not from a special bond. They point out that California has about $109 billion in outstanding and approved bonds. So these are sort of measures, over previous years. And so they're really making the case that we need to prioritize educational funding and sort of make room in the general fund, not have a bond. So if you vote yes, you are approving a $10 billion bond to fix school facilities, that's both school and community colleges. And if you vote no, you don't approve a $10 billion bond. So that's what your yes and no vote means. The next proposition, and again I'm going out of order just because we're going to do the bonds once first. So we're skipping 3 and we're going to go on to 4, which is another bond. And this is around both water and climate. So this is also seeking voter approval to take on bond debt. Again, a nice round number, 10 billion is the magic number for this year. So the money would be spent to improve water supply, water quality, storm management systems, water restoration, so bunches of things around improving sort of drinking water to make it safe for everyone. And then a second set of things that are around wildfire prevention, so it's around addressing basically issues around climate change. So money to fund wildfire protection, responses to sea level rise, mitigation of other environmental issues associated with climate change. So the breakdown is here, $10 billion, of which 4.8 is for water projects, 1.5 for wildfires, and then the rest is a split of 1.2 for coastal resilience, again that's billion, 1.2 for biodiversity protection, 2.5 billion for clean air, parks, heat mitigation, agriculture, a bunch of things. The bond also specifies that 40% of the money will be allocated to low-income communities or those most impacted by climate disasters. And the idea behind this bond is some of the money that the governor was planning or the governor and the legislature was planning to spend on this was cut because of the deficit, and so they're trying to replace some of that with the bond. So in terms of the fiscal effects, this is over 40 years, so again it will be a little bit less a year, so it's again 400 million a year, which is again less than 0.5% over 40 years. In terms of the money, so you've got about 3.4 million, again you can see the players, again $3 signs for over $1 million, $2 signs for 100,000, and again you see the sort of people who feel strongly for and against. So supporters say, the threat from climate change is urgent, it's growing, we really need to act now to build resilience. And they say that again, this would be really efficient, sensible investments to improve solutions to help us sort of, future-proof our society against climate change. The opponents, again, don't argue with the fact that we need clean drinking water, wildfire prevention, but they're again making the case that this should be funded from the general fund, not a bond. And again, what supporters and opponents say aren't necessarily accurate, but one of the things they're claiming is that this would fund unproven technology with little evidence of success. So again, you are voting, if you vote yes, you are supporting a $10 billion bond for projects to reduce climate impacts. And if you vote no, you don't want the state to sell $10 billion. The third one we're going to is Prop 5, and this is the one that's bond adjacent. So it's not actually a bond, but it has to do with the approval threshold for local bonds. And what do we mean by that? So, I'm sorry, before I forget also, all the state measures are a simple majority. So because they've either been brought, regardless of how they've come to the ballot, they're all a simple majority. However, local bonds, when, unlike sort of state bonds that require a simple majority, if we want to pass something locally, the approval threshold is actually 2/3. It's 67%. So it's higher than 50%. And how local bonds are repaid is through our property taxes. So it's not through the general Oakland budget. If you look at your property tax bill, the stuff on the left is everything that you're repaying for bonds, and all the stuff on the right, all those line items, are your parcel taxes. So local bonds are repaid through property taxes. And so what this proposition would do is it would lower the voting threshold to pass a local bond from 67% down to 55%. these local bonds could they could fund affordable housing, you know, for low and middle class people. It could pay for infrastructure, including roads, water, fire protection. Those are the kinds of things the bonds would do. In terms of fiscal effect, probably wouldn't have an effect on the state budget because it's local, but it could increase local borrowing to do things like build more housing, infrastructure, and so on. So in terms of the money slide, and again you start to see a little bit of a ramp, about 5 million for and about 30 million against. And so supporters say that, you know, this would give local voters more autonomy to address local needs. It would help build more housing that's badly needed, so both of those are good things. While opponents say, you know, this is pushing infrastructure costs onto local governments, which increases local debt. And so, you know, we already have a very high cost of living, and this would make things more expensive. It would increase our property taxes. So if you vote yes, you are voting to decrease the vote threshold to 55% for local bonds. And if you vote no, then you're keeping the vote threshold where it is of 2/3. All right, so those are now, we come to some relatively straightforward propositions. So this one is, we're going back to Prop 3, and this has to do with marriage equality. So what the background here is, in Prop 8 in 2008 added language to the California Constitution that said that marriage was between one man and one woman. Prop 8 was overturned by the federal courts. It was ruled unconstitutional under the 14th Amendment. So California has had same-sex marriage for 10 or so years at least. And then in 2015, again just to sort of set the background, the US Supreme Court allowed same-sex marriage, and so that's, you know, allowed throughout the US. So what does this proposition do? If it passes, it doesn't make any change to who can marry. However, it repeals the outdated language from Prop 8 in the California Constitution, and it just includes marriage as a fundamental right. And so what that would do is it would protect same-sex marriage from potential changes to the US court. I mean, if the court decided to go more conservative and change their mind about same-sex marriage, what's on in the California Constitution right now is that marriage is between a man and a woman, and that's what we would revert to. And so the idea is to get rid of that and just make, you know, same-sex marriage, put it on much firmer ground. Again, in terms of money, for and against, and sort of supporters, I'll just leave you to look at this. So supporters say this is basically future-proofing us, so it's protecting against future attempts to restrict marriage for same-sex or interracial couples, and it would align the state constitution with current law and reaffirm the right to marriage as a fundamental right. So opponents say, you know, same-sex marriage is already legal, so this amendment is fixing a non-existent problem. And then this is the fun one. They claim it eliminates all rules for marriage, opening the door to child marriage, incest, and polygamy. So, and I got a shout out for polygamy at my last talk. So what your vote means is, if you're voting yes, you are basically voting for the California Constitution to explicitly include the right to marriage, and you're voting no. If you vote no, then the Constitution will not be changed. So this is now Prop 6. This is the last of the propositions that the legislature put on the ballot. And this has to do with forced labor in prison. So what's the background here? The California Constitution bans forced labor, except as a punishment for crime. So people in California prisons are required to work for minimal pay. What this proposition would do is it would ban forced labor as a punishment for crime. So it would protect people in prison from being disciplined for refusing a work assignment, but it would allow voluntary work and credits or privileges for this work. So working could benefit an inmate to potentially reduce their sentence or get some other privileges. The the Department of Corrections could change current reimbursement. Right now it's under $1 an hour. But this proposition does not mandate that the Department of Corrections pay minimum wage. It just, they could if they wanted to, but this proposition really is basically just about banning forced labor. So in terms of the fiscal effects, probably on the order of tens of millions. It's a little bit hard to estimate, so there could be an increase or a decrease in local and state criminal justice costs. But in the scheme of things of the California budget, this is not a lot. So supporters and opponents, not a lot of money, but you can sort of see who's for it and against it. So supporters basically say you're restoring human dignity by ending forced labor, which is basically a modern day form of slavery, and you are supporting rehabilitation by allowing people in prison to choose their work assignments, so potentially they could pick up a new skill, and so that would improve public safety when they leave prison. So there were no arguments submitted against it. However, opponents argue that people in prison should not dictate, the chores that they're willing to do while behind bars. So you are a yes vote, you are supporting banning forced labor in prisons, and no vote, you support keeping the current exceptions to forced labor. All right, so now we're going to go into our double-digit ones. So these are the ones that were put on the ballot by signatures. So it was put on by a special interest, so it's really important to look at the money slide when we come to that. So this is around raising, it's number 32, it's around raising the minimum wage. And currently the state minimum wage is $16. And there's kind of a modest increase that's proposed. And a little background here, they were actually trying to bring this measure to the ballot in 2022. So by the time it's now 2024, a few other things have happened. So while the current minimum wage across California is $16, there are two exceptions. Fast food workers actually have a minimum wage of $20 that just passed earlier this year, and healthcare workers actually have a ramp to $25. So again, a couple of groups have already sort of moved on. Oakland has its own higher minimum wage. It's about $16.50. And how this works is, if the city has a minimum wage and the state has a minimum wage, whichever is higher takes precedence. So Oakland currently takes a little precedence over this because it's $16.50. So what the measure would do is, it would raise the minimum wage to $18 an hour for employers who have 26 or more workers. So that would go to $18 starting 2025. For smaller businesses, if you have 25 or fewer workers, the minimum wage would go to $17 in 2025 and then $18 the year after. The idea is to give them a little bit of a ramp, and then the subsequent year, 2027, there would be cost of living adjustments. So in terms of the fiscal effects, it's a little bit hard to estimate, but the Legislative Analyst Office, that's what we look at a lot, for sort of estimating costs. There would probably be higher government costs for paying employees more, both state and local, but there's also potential savings then from those employees, if they make a little bit more money, would maybe use some of these programs a little less. So there could be savings from employees using Medi-Cal less or using less of CalFresh. So in terms of the money slide, this was heavily supported by Joe Sandberg, to the tune of about pretty much all the money, I think, or a good chunk of it, about close to 10 million. But again, if you just look at the money slide. So the supporters say that higher wages could improve the standard of living for millions of workers, and there was an estimate that this would affect maybe 2 million workers across California. And the increased consumer spending could help boost the economy. Opponents say that this would really hurt small businesses more because of increased operating costs, and they are worried that it may result in layoffs of workers or raise prices. And they also point out that there could be a potential for reduced business profits, then resulting in lower taxes being collected. So if you vote yes, you are voting to raise the minimum wage in California to $18. With that little split of 17 and 18, depending on how big the business is. And if you vote no, you want to keep the minimum wage the way it is. Prop 33, this is rent control. And we have actually seen a similar measure, not quite this one, but a similar measure twice, 2018 and 2020. Both times it failed by about, I think, 40% approved and 60 disapproved, or something in that order. So rent control limits how much landlords can raise rents in a year. And many cities, so Oakland has rent control or some form of rent control. San Francisco, Berkeley, we all have some form of rent control. There is a state law called Costa-Hawkins, which limits the way in which cities can legislate rent control, and it sort of Costa-Hawkins limits cities in 3 ways. One is, cities cannot impose rent control on single-family houses. The second is, cities cannot impose rent control on apartments built after 1995. That was the year the law went into effect. And third, rent control is for current tenants only. If a tenant moves out, the landlord is allowed to raise the rent to market. So the effect of this proposition, if it passes, would be to repeal the state law completely and move the authority of rent control completely to the local city. So it would allow the local government to regulate it and, on whatever type of housing they choose to, or if they choose not to have rent control at all, that's up to them too. It just moves the control over to the local. And so this is one where the fiscal impact is a little bit hard because it really depends. It's hard to estimate because it really depends on what the cities might do. I mean, it depends on how many cities and counties might pass rent control laws. Chances are the measure would reduce revenues from property taxes because properties would probably go down in value a little bit. And the decrease could be on the order of tens of millions of dollars. Again, not super significant in the scheme of things. And cities or counties may also need to spend money to enforce rent control laws. So if we look at the dollars for and against, the first group, the AIDS Healthcare Foundation, just keep them in mind because they have spent almost $30 million on this initiative this time around. They heavily supported this the last 2 times also. So they are a non-profit that focuses on healthcare and other issues for low-income people. And this is heavily opposed by the California Association of Realtors and the Apartment Association. So I think this is the most expensive initiative probably being fought this time around. So the supporters say that this proposition would allow local governments to protect renters, and they really think it should all be about local control. So local voters in the city should be able to decide if, when, how to regulate rents. At least that's the argument that they're making. The opponents are concerned that the proposition could increase housing costs and block affordable housing from being built, and if that happens, it would worsen the overall housing crisis. And they're also concerned that this could reduce home values. So if you vote yes, you want to remove the current limits on rent control. And if you vote no, you are voting to keep the limits on rent control the way they are currently. We come on to Prop 34 now, which is, don't know whether to call it complicated or it's a bit wonky. So hang with me. The AIDS Healthcare Foundation, this plays very heavily here. So ostensibly, this measure is about restricting the spending of drug profits. And what's the background here? So there's a federal law called the Federal Drug Discount Program, which allows healthcare workers that serve low-income people to buy prescription drugs at a discount and then sell them at retail prices, and that profit is what they use to expand their mission. Basically expand the service of their mission, and the AIDS Healthcare Foundation is one of these providers. The AIDS Healthcare Foundation believes strongly in rent control, and this is the third year, 2018, 2020, and now 2024, that they have used some of these profits, some of their money, to place rent control on the ballot. The California Apartment Association has had it. They have opposed rent control for three things, for 3 times in a row, and they are tired of spending their money doing it. And so they want to limit the AIDS Healthcare Foundation's ability to use their profits to bring these kinds of ballot initiatives forward. So that's really what this is about. And a little bit more about the mechanics of how this is. Medi-Cal RX is basically the prescription drug part of Medi-Cal. That's for low-income people. And so what the proposition would do, what the mechanics is, it would codify Medi-Cal RX into law, but it would create some very specific rules that basically singles out the AIDS Healthcare Foundation. It's not applying to any other healthcare providers that we know of, but this proposition would then mandate that the AIDS Healthcare Foundation would have to spend at least 98% of their revenue on direct patient care. So the fiscal effects, the last part. The fiscal effects would probably be some increased state costs to enforce these rules. And so if you look at the money, it's kind of flipped from the last one where the California Association has put money for it and the AIDS Healthcare Foundation is against it. So supporters say that any profits from discount drug programs should really be spent on healthcare, and they claim that the state could negotiate lower Medi-Cal drug prices if this goes into effect. While opponents say this is an abuse of the initiative process to target one healthcare provider that's opposing rent control, and they point out that the federal law allows profits from drug discounts to be used to support any non-profit mission of the healthcare provider. It doesn't have to be direct patient, it could be anything that's part of their mission. So if you vote yes, you want to restrict the spending of prescription drug revenues, and if you vote no, you don't want to impose new restrictions on the use of prescription drug revenues. We have 2 more state ones, so hang in there. This is again a little bit wonky again, and this is around the healthcare tax. And sometimes you really wonder why some of these things are propositions, but that's a whole different story. So California charges healthcare plans a tax. So this is called a managed care organizations tax. So it's for people like Kaiser, basically your HMOs, Kaiser, Anthem, Blue Cross Anthem, are charged this tax. It's not permanent, it's periodically reapproved, and it will expire in a couple of years unless it's renewed. But the main thing really is that the federal government matches this tax dollar for dollar. So California charges, like your Kaiser, this money, and then the federal government matches it, and that collectively is what's funding Medi-Cal. So that's generating about 7 to 8 billion a year, and it's used to support Medi-Cal. However, lawmakers, especially in down years when we have a deficit, have also used this tax money for other purposes in the state budget, not just for Medi-Cal. So the effect would be to make permanent this existing tax. That's fine, pending federal approval. More importantly, it would earmark this tax money to increase reimbursement payment to be spent on Medi-Cal only, and to increase reimbursement payments for certain types of services, like primary and specialty care. It would prevent lawmakers from using the tax money for other purposes or for replacing existing funding. So the fiscal effects would be two things. One is it would be increased medical funding, but it would also be increased state costs for expanding services, especially in years where we might get less of a match from the federal government. So if you look at the dollars, you can see who's going to benefit. So there is no registered opposition. The governor has come out against it more recently. And what do supporters say? So supporters say that this would support, protect and expand access to healthcare for millions of Californians, including children, low-income families, seniors, people with disabilities. And while there's no organized opposition, the governor and policy experts basically say, earmarking how tax revenue is spent makes it very difficult to balance the state budget, especially, in down years. And they are also concerned that expanding medical services will create additional costs to the state, especially in times where we might get less of a match from the federal government. So you are voting yes to make this existing tax permanent, most importantly with the new spending restrictions, and you're voting no to continue things as is. All right, we have one more state one, and then we'll take a break for questions after that. And this is one you've probably seen a lot of ads around, and this is Prop 36 around increasing crime penalties. So a little background here, in 2014, we had Prop 47, which turned non-violent crimes like drug possession, shoplifting into misdemeanors, and misdemeanors being less serious than felonies, unless the person had already had prior convictions for serious crimes. So the result was prison population decreased, and there was money saved that was redirected towards social programs. But increasingly, recently what's happened is we've had a lot of increase in organized retail theft. We've had smash and grab, and this proposition and some other laws that the governor has passed are basically in sort of response to that. So the effect of this proposition would be to reclassify theft of items that are less than $950 from misdemeanors back to felonies if the suspect has 2 prior convictions. So basically it sort of rolls back Prop 47 to some extent that, if a suspect already has 2 felonies and they have a 3rd crime, then that's classified as a felony, not a misdemeanor. It would add fentanyl to the list of hard drugs, and that means it increases penalties for its sale and use. And it would create a new class of crime called the treatment mandated felony, which gives the offender the option to participate in drug and mental health treatment. So people, if they don't contest their charges and if they complete drug treatment, could avoid going to prison. However, if they don't complete the treatment, then they would still face their prison term. So the fiscal effects are probably increased state and local criminal justice costs. I mean, the thinking is there would be probably more people going to prison. And there would probably be less savings from Prop 47. Again, if more people are going to prison, the savings that we had that were being used for mental health and drug treatment, school programs, some of those savings are not going to be realized anymore. So in terms of supporters and opponents, so it's pretty much many of the retailers really supported because they were hit hardest by the retail theft. And what the supporters say is, tougher laws are needed against retail crime to protect businesses and reducing crime and substance abuse. By mandating treatment for felony drug offenders, this would reduce crime and substance abuse. The opponents say that this is going to make the state less safe because it's going to reduce the savings from Prop 47, so it's reducing funding for crime prevention, treatment, rehabilitation, and then it's going to cost taxpayers a lot more money to imprison more people without reducing crime. So you are voting yes to increase penalties on some crimes, and then you're voting no to keep the current penalties. So the good news is, if anybody remembers 2022, we had 10 Oakland measures. We just about killed us. The good news is, we have only 3. So similar to the state ones, you've got the city council can put measures on, or we also have a local initiative process. So the city council is put on 2. There are MM and OO, and the initiative is through Measure NN. So this is around wildfire prevention. Oops, notes again. I don't think it's a surprise to anyone that the Oakland Hills require active management. We are pretty much high wildfire risk, and the voters in the hills have previously voted to fund fire prevention. And this year, in 2022, Oakland developed a 10-year comprehensive vegetation management plan because wildfire risks are just going up. So they have this comprehensive vegetation management plan, but the question is, how do you fund it? And so this measure is a parcel tax which is intended to fund that vegetation management plan. So what the measure would do is, it is a special tax. It would go on for 20 years, and it's all around implementing this plan, which is managing dead, drying trees, managing evacuation routes, basically everything that you need to do around wildfires. So this is an interesting one, because this depends only voters who live in a specific area, which is this red outline, which is a little hard to see, and let me point out where it is. So the road down the middle is Highway 13. So voters, if you live pretty much above Highway 13 or a little bit below, which is kind of a funny jagged profile, and then you come down to Highway 13 and 580 meet, again a little bit below 580 and then above 580. Only voters who live in this area will see it on the ballot. If you don't live in this area, so you may or may not see Measure MM on your ballot. If you live in this area, what you are voting on is, you are voting on an annual parcel tax on properties within this area. So it's possible that you are in the area but you don't own properties, so you're voting on parcel tax for somebody else, but that's just the way it goes. So it is an annual parcel tax, $99 for single family, $65 a unit for multi-unit residential. There's a formula for commercial. Again, there is, for 20 years. There are some exemptions around sort of, affordable housing, seniors on a fixed income, so on and so forth. And the amount is about $2.7 million that it would raise annually. And, when it comes to city measures, there's typically not a lot of money that goes into it. There is a little bit here, so you can see about, 3,500. And so we've got the signatories here, just so you sort of see the players who've put this on or who are supporting this measure. And so the supporters basically say the most effective way to prevent wildfires is preventative. And so this is basically the funding to fund the implementation of Oakland's vegetation management plan. Opponents, don't argue that wildfire prevention is essential, but they're really making the case that this should come out of the general fund. That's Oakland's budget. And again, they are not happy about oversight because an audit by the city auditor is optional, so it's not mandatory. So if this is on your ballot and you vote yes, you are supporting a special tax for wildfire prevention. And if you vote no, you're opposing a special tax for wildfire prevention. And this is a 2/3 majority is needed for this one to pass. Measure NN is around violence prevention, and this is a little wonky because it came through the ballot through the initiative process. Even though it is a tax, it requires a simple majority, which is kind of unusual. So what the situation here is since 2014, under Measure Z, that's the parcel tax we've had that will expire at the end of this year, Oakland has collected both property and parking lot taxes to fund violence prevention, emergency response programs. And so the money that's collected from Z goes to a little bit to the police department, some to the Department of Violence Prevention, and some to the Oakland Fire Department. And it's all been collectively about 30 million a year, and this measure is going to expire. So the effect of this measure is to extend and increase that parcel tax for another 9 years, and it would increase it, I'll show you how much, to raise more money. So it would increase it to being 47 million. And the numbers here are, of the 47 million, about 3 million a year would go to the fire department. What's left, 60% would go to OPD and 40% to the Department of Violence Prevention. And of that money that the Department of Violence Prevention gets, they would have to use 75% to provide grants to community-based organizations for the kinds of work that they do. So the details on the tax are currently under Measure C, the amount is about $133 annually, and that would go to $198. The multi-unit ones from $91 would go to $132, and this is a parking surcharge for commercial parking lots, would go from 8.5 to 10%. And again, you've got annual increases, some exemptions for people with low incomes, and again, the amount that would be raised is about 47 million. Again, you know, while it's not common to have a lot of dollars, I think anybody who lives in Oakland, it's not a surprise that, you know, everyone's pretty concerned about violence prevention, and so there's a number of businesses that have put money towards it, so you can see that and the signatories below that. And so supporters say that this would enhance public safety by funding critical violence prevention programs. It would pay for police and firefighters, and it would provide resources to improve the 911 system. Opponents say that, you know, Measure C has not prevented violence, so the measure should not be extended, and they are also not happy that enough of these funds don't go directly to support the hiring of police officers, that there's sort of larger program than strictly to the police. So again, if you vote yes on this measure, you are supporting extending and increasing this parcel tax for another 9 years, and if you vote no, you're opposing extending this parcel tax. The last one is Measure OO, and this is again a simple majority, and this has to do with the Public Ethics Commission. So in 1996, Oakland voters approved the Public Ethics Commission. You know, their job is ensuring compliance of the government or Oakland's government with campaign finance, transparency, lobbyist registration laws, you know, all the fun stuff like that. It's staffed by 7 volunteer commissioners, but also a small department of city staff members. Those are paid city staff members. You know, over the years, the commission has had some more authority, has had its staffing. However, what's happened is that the investigative workload over the years, presumably because there's a lot more money in government and politics, has increased significantly to the point that 50% or half of the commission's investigative workload is on hold. So this measure is all about a few things. One is it's sort of updating, because the Public Ethics Commission is written into the charter. Anytime you make changes, it sort of has to come back to the voters. So it's some, you know, stuff around sort of streamlining commission operation, to update governance, quorum rules, sort of help overall operation. It would add 1 ethics investigator, and I'll come to what that costs in just a minute. And then it would lower it would lower the maximum gift limit. That is the maximum anybody can give to an elected, as in a registered lobbyist, can give to an elected city office holder, a candidate, or a member of their family. It would lower that maximum limit to $50. So, 50, yeah, 50. So the fiscal effects are really around hiring this additional investigator. it's about 250K. And then there's some stuff around the classifications which may result in some savings or may result in additional costs, but ballpark, that's kind of what you're looking at. Again, we've got no money, but we've got signatories for and against. And so supporters say really to be effective, the commission must have the resources to manage its actual workload. And they really point out that it's desirable to limit gifts from lobbyists, and so reducing this limit, I forget what it is currently, but they're reducing it down to 50, so that's a good thing to do. Opponents, say they're not basically happy with the Public Ethics Commission, and it says they haven't done a good job of holding the public accountable, or the public officials accountable, and ensuring that government processes are transparent, so they're really not supportive of additional funding. So you are voting yes to approve the charter amendments to the Public Ethics Commission, and then, or if you vote no, you're opposing the charter amendments. Let me just zip through like a few more slides here to close this out, and then we'll take questions. So this is our website, lwvoakland.org. Again, this was very, very brief, so please, we have a lot more information on there, so please check that out. Again, we don't support or oppose candidates, but we have conducted candidate forums pretty much on all the races in Oakland, so you can go there to take, to listen to those and hear directly from the candidates. We also have 2 fund recall elections, not 1 but 2. One is for the mayor, and again, just a little bit in terms of mechanics. Somebody asked me earlier, I'll get to the money in a second actually. So in this election, we're deciding whether or not to recall the mayor. So again, it's simple majority. If you vote yes, you're voting that she be removed from office now. If you vote no, then you're voting that she be allowed to continue to finish her term, which ends in January of 2027. So again, simple majority, 50 votes. If it does, just walking through some of the mechanics, if the recall passes, then the president of the city council takes over as the mayor. The president right now is Nikki Fortunato Bass, and she's running for election. But regardless, whoever the president, if she moves on, city council will again elect a new president, and they would take over as temporary mayor. And then we would have a new election, probably March-ish or so of next year. The DA recall, things are a little bit different again, simple majority, same thing there, but if the recall passes, then the Alameda County Board of Supervisors actually appoints a new DA who completes out the term. Someone asked me about the money for and against, and I don't have any data on that, but there is a website that's run called Open Disclosure. That's really a good one to check out candidates. So if you go to Open Disclosure, you'll see who's basically given money for and against, and you can make a decision based on that. In case you're not aware, there was a proposition of an Oakland measure we passed in 2020 around allowing 16 and 17-year-olds to vote only in school board elections. And that's finally been implemented. So if you know anyone who's 16 or 17, urge them to pre-register, because then they can vote for the school board director in their district. All our elections, all Oakland elections are ranked choice voting. We get up to 5 choices. So again, make sure you start with, the person you really love, you move on to the person you like. When you get to somebody you hate, please stop. You don't have to use all 5, because then you can't complain if they do end up in, then it really was your fault if they ended up in government. And again, it's really important that you just fill out one bubble in each one of these columns, because if you fill out multiples in a column, then the computer doesn't know who your choice is. And so that ballot is discarded for that race. Again, you get 5 choices, you don't have to use them all. Pros and cons, again, this is just about, we have 1-pagers on our website for the local ones, we have videos, we have more information on the state ones, again, short videos if you're more of a video person. And thank you for being here. This is amazing. We'd always love to have you join us. If you would like